Good morning, maggots. It's been a while. Now, even though I'm definitely not going to be doing this very often in the near future, I decided that this is so absolutely insane, I have to briefly come out of retirement to make a response video to this. Here we go.
The nationwide uprising against racist policing in the wake of George Floyd's murder is stunning, not least for the amount of property destruction it has entailed. Responses to the vandalism and theft have varied, ranging from condemnations of violence amid peaceful protests, warnings of anarchist agitators, and an emphasis on criminal opportunism amid the chaos. But the mainstream media reaction has been surprisingly tempered in comparison to coverage of the 2014 Ferguson uprising. A story in USA Today suggested that while people need not condone the riots, they ought to understand them. Neither the New York Times nor the Washington Post has used the word riot in a headline. While editorials call for peace, love, and the maintenance of order, there has, thus far, been minimal liberal pearl clutching. There seems to be an understanding that too many lines have been crossed, too many innocent people murdered, too many communities over-policed and otherwise neglected to expect anyone to react reasonably.
Which is why we need to cross some lines ourselves, which is why we need to steal from and kill innocent people who had nothing to do with these instances of police brutality, which is why we need to resist all attempts made by people to protect their own rights or the rights of others. Don't you dare ask us how it's going to solve the problem. We just want an excuse to steal, plunder, and murder.
It is a testament to the real power of actual mass movements that the media establishment has felt compelled to cover illegal, expensive, and destructive protests with such care.
On the contrary, it's a testament to a mainstream media that has sucked up to the regressive left for so long, being forced to cover these events carefully because even they recognize that what these people are doing is so unjustified, so batshit crazy, that not even they can defend them with a straight face, without alienating the normies who are still stupid enough to watch their shit.
But what if property destruction is more than an understandable lapse of judgment and loss of control? What if it is not a frustrated, emotional reaction but a reasonable and articulate expression in itself?
Because nothing says reasonable or articulate like making incoherent, psychopathic justifications for victimizing innocent people you do not know, people who had nothing to do with the murder of certain individuals by pigs in uniform. Even the Columbine shooters and Brandon Tarrant had a manifesto behind their utterly pointless acts of cruelty and violence. Both were every bit as articulate as the bullshit you are spouting right now.
Given the racial dimension of these protests, even apparently sympathetic explanations of theft and destruction risk of implying that people of color are reacting from feelings rather than carrying out reasoned, calculated acts with their own perfectly legitimate political logics.
Racial, huh? Why is it that when a not black police officer brutalizes a black person, it gets so much attention in the media, but hardly anyone can tell you who Daniel Schaefer or Duncan Lemp are? Or why instances of black police officers brutalizing black suspects hardly gets any attention? This is proof that this is far from a racial issue. The mainstream media is smart enough to realize that white on black crime is almost universally frowned upon, especially when it's committed by a police officer, mainly because of how much black people suffered when slavery was still legal, and even for decades after that, which is why they report on it so heavily compared to other instances of police brutality. If it bleeds, it leads. The fact that it leads so effectively is proof that there is something else at play other than anti-black racism. But no, you need to divide people on racial lines.
Attacking police stations, for example, makes rational sense.
Well, it's too bad that these reprobates are too cowardly to do that. No, they have to go after innocent people instead.
This moment calls for the left to define violence and nonviolence, for itself to decide what nonviolence means in the face of overwhelming state brutality and structural economic and racial injustice.
Translation. We must redefine terms, as we always do, so that we may continue to accuse our enemies of committing the very same crimes we commit ourselves. Kind of like how we redefined the term theft to mean the mere act of owning property, rather than the act of taking something that rightfully belongs to someone else, among other things.
property destruction is not synonymous with the violence that is being protested. The notion that protesters are mistakenly employing violence and thus counterproductively adding to some imagined social sum total of violence is flawed.
To exercise control over a man's property is to exercise control over his life, and thus make him your slave. Sounds pretty violent to me.
Plate glass windows don't bleed. They don't die and leave loved ones grieving. They don't contribute to the collective trauma and terror experienced by their communities. They just break, and then, at some point, they are replaced by identical sheets of glass.
It does drive up insurance premiums, thus making it more difficult for small businesses to repair their business when it gets looted. You are collectively making life difficult for everyone, you fucking jackass.
Martin Luther King Jr. suggested that looting, rather than being an opportunistic means of acquisition, demonstrated a keen understanding of a political economy organized around repression, exploitation, and disenfranchisement. Often the Negro does not even want what he takes, he wants the experience of taking. Alienated from society and knowing that this society cherishes property above people, he is shocking it by abusing property rights.
Appeals to authority won't work on me. If Martin Luther King actually believed that, despite saying plenty of other stuff that directly contradicts it, that would mean he was full of shit when he said it. I agree with plenty of stuff Malcolm X said. Does that mean I'm a black nationalist? No, Malcolm X was full of shit most of the time. Hell, I don't even make that appeal when it comes to people like Murray Rothbard, Samuel E. Kronkin III, or Hans Hermann Hoppe. I don't uncritically swallow everything my favorite philosopher says. That's stupid.
Or the looter might want something. Nothing symbolizes the exclusion, deprivation, and gross class inequality that characterizes our current economic system more perfectly than the luxury stores looted in New York City's Soho district before the imposition of the curfew. Given that capitalism largely restricts pleasure to the consumption of goods, we should be able to entertain the idea that this taking of unnecessary things, while not a recognizably political act, is understandable or even justifiable.
That's only true if value is objective, which it is not. It's subjective. If something is in high demand, the price goes up. If something is in low demand, the price goes down. The amount of labor you put into something is almost completely meaningless in the real world. If something is pricey, that means one of two things. Either it's in high demand with little supply, or some people like to show off their bling by buying unnecessarily expensive shit. Which is the perfect explanation for why stupid people, especially left-wingers, continue to buy overpriced low-end computers known as Macintosh computers. Whether or not you see any value in these unnecessary things, you have no justification for looting them. I despise Apple with a passion, and yet I find it hilarious how many leftists covet their products, whether they get them legitimately or not.
What is incredibly revealing about a wave of protests, marked by widespread property destruction, is the total impossibility of making capitalism sympathetic. Verizon, Apple, Nike, Macy's, and the like cannot be reasonably presented as a social good.
You can easily go throughout your entire life without giving a single cent to any of the companies listed.
Small business owners are a different and more complicated matter.
Translation: normal people are more likely to smell our bullshit if we just admit that, like our comrades in the old Soviet Union, we simply hate normal people for trying to make a living. We hate the self-employed. We hate the petite bourgeoisie and the kulaks just as much as we hate big business. But we'll tread carefully so people are less likely to suspect it.
The image of the mom-and-pop shop conflates property and diably, effectively presenting the destruction of property as a direct attack on an individual.
Why does that concern you? You hate individualism. Otherwise you wouldn't be a socialist.
Certainly there is a meaningful difference between a neighborhood grocer and a Whole Foods, but the figure of the small business is also one means by which a capitalist ruling class launders itself. This is not to say that small business owners are not sympathetic and worthy of protection, only that we should be wary of how they are instrumentalized in the service of protecting a wealthy minority.
This is exactly why small business owners, the self-employed, and the so-called petite bourgeoisie are every bit as likely to be murdered under socialism as big businessmen and former heads of state are. Communists believe that anyone who does not want to live by their economic model is either a member of the capitalist class or is at least conspiring with them and is thus their enemy. They've declared war on anyone who wishes to retain their own property, who wishes to trade goods and services as they see fit, at any price they deem to be appropriate. You cannot compromise with these people. You cannot peacefully coexist with such people.
People of color have always faced much higher barriers when opening small businesses due to discriminatory lending policies, and they will certainly suffer more than white-owned businesses because loans to repair damage and reopen will be harder to come by and carry higher interest rates. Trotting them out as an excuse for repression is cynical at best.
Which, of course, is exactly why you support the very same policies that have historically been designed to screw over the working class and black people in particular. Stop pretending to give a shit about these people. They are nothing but political fodder to you.
Many small business owners have refused to be used as a pretext for maligning protesters. Missy O'Reilly, the owner of an East Village karaoke bar, says that the damage to her establishment sucks, but it is only broken glass and stolen booze, which is an easy fix, compared to what people of color are dealing with in this country. Another cafe owner whose storefront had been smashed simply replied, "If this is the price we have to pay for human rights, so be it." Salam Othana, a Yemeni immigrant whose store, Express Food Market in the south side of Chicago, was destroyed amid protests, responded, "I understand why it happened, and it's okay. It's not like I have to blame someone for this. I understand why this happened. If it sends out the message, it doesn't matter to us." Zahalia Anderson, the owner of the Urban League of Self-Defense, thinks that property destruction was politically necessary and continues to support the protests, in spite of her personal losses. "I think we've tried a lot of ways to be heard," she said. "People riot because they can't speak it no more. They just have to show you."
All you've got are anecdotes about cash-cucked business owners who labor under the delusion that the people who stole wealth from them and destroyed their property were acting reasonably, or that their behavior was even remotely justifiable or even sympathetic, or that destroying the livelihoods of innocent people will do a damn thing for the families still grieving for the members who have fallen victim to police brutality, or do anything to actually hurt those responsible. Infinitely more accounts abound of small business owners crying about their livelihoods being destroyed, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, mourning over the loss of their family members, killed not by police, but by leftist filth, who grasp at any flimsy excuse they can to victimize their fellow man. Shop owners taking up arms to defend their property, or civilian militias organizing to protect their own property and the property of their neighbors. The people you mention are utterly spineless cucks who don't believe in standing up for themselves. We're not stupid. We don't believe that most people are like that.
Offensive as it is to liberal sensibilities, property destruction may be integral to the success of the current uprising. At the very least, it is what marks it as different from the many other waves of protests against police brutality that have occurred over the past decade. Not because property destruction has any moral or political value in itself, but because it is coercive.
Yes, it is indeed coercive. Not to the state, but to innocent people who have done no harm, because again, you are too much of a pussy to actually go after those responsible. Also, nice job at admitting that your ideology is inherently coercive and authoritarian, and that we have no reason to support it over the current status quo. Even the corporatist fascism we currently have is preferable to what you want to bring about. I didn't cry over Richard Spencer when he got sucker punched in the street, and I wouldn't cry a single tear if leftists like yourself got brutalized by the police either. You can't be too brutal with someone who wants to violently deprive everyone else of their property. You can't be too brutal with a violent authoritarian who believes that his objective opinion on how the world should be run is the one objective true way. I'm sure you'd get the same treatment even if it was at the hands of a private militia or individual defending his property. I'm actually under the impression that the police would show far more mercy to you than I personally would, should you attempt to impose your will onto me or those I love. This land is my land, this land ain't your land. I've got a shotgun and you ain't got one. If you don't get off, I'll blow your head off. This land is private property.
Property is itself a violent thing. It is created through a combination of state-sponsored expropriation and exploitation, and it is defended by various forms of state-sanctioned violence.
Last I checked, the state's power comes from the opposite of that.
Given that the object of these protests is the defunding of racist, murderous police departments, we need to remember that large portions of our national wealth was created through the violent expropriation of land from Native Americans that was subsequently made productive and profitable through the forced labor of stolen Africans.
I hope you don't forget that your beloved Karl Marx openly cheered on the United States for conquering Mexican and Native American lands because he believed that neither of them made any profitable use of the resources that they sat on. Your ideology has absolutely no moral or ethical basis upon which to oppose imperialism because you do not recognize any borders at all, whether they be between nations or private property owned by individuals. The means of production are all fair game to you guys, even if it belongs to a neighboring society. Those who do not believe in either nationalism or property rights have no reason to oppose imperialism except for the sake of optics. Again, stop pretending that these people aren't political fodder to you. You don't care about them. You only want to demagogue to them.
Income inequality in the United States is the highest it's been since the Census Bureau began tracking it 50 years ago.
Which is why extreme poverty is rapidly decreasing worldwide, despite the quasi-fascism and wannabe Keynesianist socialism we have right now.
Refusing to incorporate acts of destruction into the political imaginary of protest deprives these acts of their political power. It deprives the movement of a source of material strength. And, perhaps most importantly, it ignores what many protesters are saying with both bricks and words, that the wealth contained in these looted stores is slavery money. So when we take it back or we burn it down, yeah, we're getting back what's ours.
You're damn right I want to deprive the looters of political power. People who latch onto any flimsy excuse they can to victimize random innocents they don't even know should not have any say over how other people use their property, how other people live their lives. Those people they are looting haven't stolen anything. They haven't profited off of the suffering of your long-dead ancestors, nor have they profited off of the murders committed by cops. Look, you don't need to write a painfully cringy wall of text to justify your hatred for your fellow man. It would just be easier if you came up front about you being a violent, insane psychopath.